I recently watched the CGI series of Thomas and Friends in its entirety for the very first time. After I did this, I started thinking about making a video where I talk about my opinions on certain episodes. This video was inspired by Yami Tay, who does wonderful reviews of Thomas home media releases, and her playlist is linked in the description. With this video, I decided to review all of the episodes that put the Fat Controller in the spotlight. There are only 6 episodes that do this, so it won't take too long. Are you sitting comfortably? No? I don't care, let's begin. The first episode is Lady Hat's birthday party. Bertie has noticed that the Fat Controller is acting a little strange, and Percy says he saw him staring at the clouds earlier. The reason is because it's Lady Hat's birthday, and Sir Topham Hatt is probably thinking about what to get for her. They never actually explain why he's staring at the clouds, they just say it's because it's his wife's birthday, but that doesn't really tell us anything. The Fat Controller has bought himself a new suit, which is exactly the same as his old one. On his way to the party, his car gets a puncture, so he asks Caroline to give him a lift. Caroline overheats, and George is rude about it. George's driver is more polite and offers to take Topham instead. George's oil splashes all over his driver and the Fat Controller, then he swerves off the road and Topham falls in a muddy ditch. Luckily, Thomas is nearby, so he asks his driver for a lift. But Thomas's fireman is ill, so Topham decides to be the fireman. They make it to the station just in time. The Fat Controller picks up some flowers and goes into the party. Lady Hat forgives her husband for looking so messy, she's just glad he got here on time. The party starts, but you're not invited, so the doors close. I like this episode because it shows us that the Fat Controller is more than just an authority figure who reprimands engines when they've been naughty. He's a person too, and he won't let whatever life throws at him prevent him from getting to his wife's birthday party on time. The only thing I find a bit strange about this episode are this line.
Call yourself a car, you're a disgrace to the road. Find yourself a scrapyard.
A scrapyard is the vehicle equivalent of a graveyard, so George basically just told Caroline to kill herself? Isn't this a kids' show? As for the narration, Michael Angelis does a great job. He's just as energetic as he always was in the classic series. As for the American version, I wasn't expecting to like it, but I do. I actually like Alec Baldwin's narration in this episode. His voices for Lady Hat and Caroline are quite funny.
It was Lady Hat's birthday, and Sir Topham had a new outfit. "It's perfect for my birthday party," said his wife. "You'll look splendid, Topham dear." But Caroline didn't like going fast. "I'm hot. My engine will overheat." And it did. "Told you so."
They also like his voice for the Sir Topham Hatt. I give this episode a 9 out of 10. By the way, does anyone know why Series 5's episodes don't credit the narrator? I'm pretty sure it's the only season that does this, and it's a bit odd. The second episode is Sir Topham Hatt's Holiday. And yes, it is called that on both sides of the Atlantic. The UK version is not called the Fat Controller's Holiday, as you might expect it to be. But anyway, Thomas is taking the Hats to the beach. Lady Hat is tired, which for some reason causes her to be rude about Annie and Clarabelle, much to Thomas's dismay. Thomas's driver admits that the coaches do need some maintenance. Percy takes the family to the airfield where Harold the helicopter lives, and then a rude plane called Tiger Moth flies too low and nearly kills the Fat Controller. Then it goes missing and Harold's pilot asks the Fat Controller to join the search. When they find it, the Fat Controller gives its pilot a stern talking to. Then Toby takes them to a river inlet. The Hats go sailing, but they don't look where they're going and the boat gets stuck in a mudbank. Percy arrives and uses the breakdown train to lift the boat out of the water and take it back to the station by the sea. Annie and Clarabelle have been repaired and they look so much better that Lady Hat doesn't recognise them.
What splendid coaches, so much more suitable than those old beach huts on wheels. No one said a word.
The episode ends with Annie and Clarabelle saying they'll always be useful no matter what they look like. This episode is okay, but it does feel like filler. Not much happens apart from the Fat Controller's near-death experience. Narration is, again, decent in both dubs. Michael Angelis and Alec Baldwin both did a great voice for Tiger Moth's pilot.
Yes, sir. Jolly good idea, sir.
Yes, sir. Jolly good idea, sir.
But I'm not sure why Baldwin decided to make Annie and Clarabelle sound like they're from Texas.
It's very nice to get compliments, but no matter what we look like, we'll always be useful, won't we, Thomas? No.
It's a bit weird, and I'm not sure if I like it. I give this episode a 6 out of 10. The third episode is The Grand Opening. The narrow gauge engines are helping to build a new line. The Fat Controller will arrive at its grand opening on Harold. Skarloey arrived too late to hear the Fat Controller announce this. Unfortunately, Harold has engine trouble. Topham found a hot air balloon that could get them there, but his wife wasn't so keen.
Topham, you cannot be serious. Me? Ride in this?
Skarloey is worried that his extra work will make him late again. The Fat Controller notices that Skarloey is running late and he starts to worry too. The balloon's fire goes out and it starts to fall. Skarloey sees the balloon falling into the tree and he stops. The Hats board Skarloey's boxcar and then they make their way to the grand opening. This episode is quite similar to Better Late Than Never from Series 2, where some workmen are working on the viaduct, which keeps causing the engines to be late, which causes Thomas to be late, which causes Bertie to be late. And then Bertie breaks down, but luckily Thomas is so late that he can take his passengers for him. And that episode was filler, but it was decent. The grand opening, however, is not very good in my opinion. I find it a bit boring. It's not the most boring episode, far from it. It's just okay. Michael Angelis doesn't sound as enthusiastic as he normally does, but personally I don't mind this, as it is a slower story, so a quieter narration makes sense. Michael Brandon, on the other hand, is honestly doing quite well for his first season. I can appreciate him sounding more interested than Angelis does, however I do not like his voice for Rusty at all.
Even so, you were still late, teased Rusty.
Why does he sound like a big strong man? He's literally a small NB. This was my first time listening to one of Robert Hartshorn's scores for Series 7, and it's alright. I honestly don't have much to say about it other than I like the jingle when the balloon appears.
And he did.
I give this episode a 4 out of 10. The fourth episode is Double Trouble. Okay, I know this episode technically isn't a Fat Controller episode, but I want to talk about it anyway because the idea of it is neat. It's the Fat Controller's birthday, and Thomas is going to take him and his wife to the party. Thomas sees who he thinks is Topham at the station and thinks he must be late. Then, the Fat Controller turns around to reveal a moustache. He begins to act very strangely. Thomas wants to ask him why, but doesn't want to look silly. Thomas warns the Fat Controller that they might be late for the party, but he just fobs him off and asks some children if they want to play hide and seek with him. Edward apparently doesn't know what a moustache is.
And what's that on his face? A moustache! It just appeared!
And Thomas wants to ask the Fat Controller what's going on, but doesn't want to look silly, so doesn't ask. Topham then goes into a signal box and asks the signalman if he can have a turn with the levers. This is very dangerous, and Gordon ends up taking the express onto a branch line with his 2 express coaches. Thomas arrives at the station he was meant to pick Topham up from, and the station master is cross at Thomas for being late, and tells him that the Fat Controller and his wife were waiting for so long that they ended up going to the party on Bertie the bus, but he never arrived. It is then revealed that the man Thomas thought was the Fat Controller is actually his brother, Sir Loam Hat. Thomas finds Bertie, and Topham is annoyed at Loam for causing confusion and delay. Then Thomas went back to tell Edward and Gordon to hurry to the party. Weren't they doing that anyway? They do, and everyone has fun. When I first watched this episode, I genuinely enjoyed the mystery of why the Fat Controller was acting so strange, and I like the explanation of it being his brother, even if the model of Loam is just Topham with a moustache. Now though, I find it boring, much like the rest of Series 13. It uses the 3 strikes formula, which is always a bore. I honestly don't have a lot to say about the narration or the voice acting in this episode, other than I like Loam's voice in the US dub.
I know, Thomas. Let's go to the Whispering Woods. It's one of my favorite spots. We have plenty of time before the party.
He sounds a lot like Alec Baldwin's Topham, and I think I actually prefer Thomas's US voice over his UK one, which is something I never thought I'd say. Ben Small voices Thomas in the UK dub, and that voice is rather babyish and annoying. Martin Sherman voices Thomas in the US dub, and while he does still sound young, he sounds a bit more mature and less annoying.
First, the Fat Controller had a moustache. Next, he wanted to play hide-and-seek with the children. Then he sent Gordon off the express line and away from the party. The Fat Controller is acting very strangely indeed.
First, Sir Topham Hatt had a mustache. Next, he wanted to play hide-and-seek with the children. Then he sent Gordon off the express line and away from the party. Sir Topham Hatt is acting very strangely indeed.
Overall, this episode is not the worst, but it's not good. 4 out of 10. Episode 5 is Happy Birthday, Sir. It's the Fat Controller's birthday. Again. Thomas has been shunting heavy trucks all morning and still has a lot of work to do. The Fat Controller arrives in Winston, his railway inspection car. He explains to Thomas that he's going shopping with his wife and his mother. He asks Thomas to take Winston with him while he works, and then come back to the docks at tea time. This was during the era where they had to mention tea time in every episode for some reason. Everything had to be done by tea time, I don't know why. Salty tells Thomas about the olden days when the Fat Controller was a child. Every year on his birthday he would ride in his favourite carriage, the oldest carriage on the island of Sodor, and it would be pulled by Edward. It turns out nobody knows where the carriage is now. Thomas sets off to do his jobs, but Winston is thinking about the lost carriage. While Thomas is doing his work, Winston keeps arriving a few seconds after him because he's looking for the old carriage. He tries to tell Thomas what he's doing, but Thomas doesn't listen and tells him that looking for things is not being really useful, being on time is. This happens 3 times. But the 3rd time, Winston says he found what he was looking for, but Thomas still won't listen and tells Winston to go in front of him so he won't lose him again. Then Winston sees something and stops, and Thomas bumps into him. Winston has now found the carriage. Edward takes it to Knapford, which makes the Fat Controller very happy indeed. This episode is not very good, but in my opinion it's the least bad episode of Series 16. Series 16 is easily the most boring season of the entire show. I would even go as far as to say it's worse than Series 12. I like the flashback to the Fat Controller's childhood, and it's nice that he recognises the carriage, and it's nice that in the flashback they removed the wrinkles from Edward's face so he looks younger. But other than that, this episode is just yet another boring 3 strikes episode. Also, have you noticed that the episode called Happy Birthday Sir is not actually a Sir Topham Hatt spotlight episode? This episode is about Thomas and Winston more than him, but at least the Fat Controller is still a significant character in it. I really don't have anything to say about the narration or voice acting in this episode. 2 out of 10. The 6th and final episode is Goodbye Fat Controller, known as Goodbye Sir Topham Hatt in the US. It opens with Topham's old theme, which is pretty cool. Percy enters Knapford Station with the mail train and overhears some men talking about the Fat Controller leaving. Percy assumes this means he's leaving the island of Sodor. The engines then realise that they might be the reason he has decided to leave. They do cause confusion and delay quite often. Because of this, they all decide to be more useful than ever by being really early for their jobs. Then there is a musical montage with an instrumental of the Fat Controller's song from the CGI series. The Fat Controller asks Henry why everyone is acting so strange, and Henry tells him that the engines are just happy that he runs the railway. The Fat Controller says he's happy too, and he loves the railway. The engines find this reassuring until the next day, when Percy sees the same men clearing out the Fat Controller's office. They even took the telephone When Percy tells the other engines that they're throwing him out, Thomas says they should go on strike to make sure the Fat Controller doesn't have to leave. The Fat Controller comes to the shed to get the engines to work, and then he explains that he's not leaving, he's just having his office redecorated. And everyone goes back to work feeling much happier. I really like this episode. I think it's great that the engines are so determined to stop the Fat Controller from leaving the island, even though he isn't. It's obvious that they genuinely like their boss, which just goes to show that Sir Topham Hatt is a very nice man, contrary to what certain people on the internet might tell you.
Don't make me tap the sign.
And as for the narration, this one is narrated by Mark Morahan, who is actually my personal favourite narrator. He sounds very similar to Michael Angelis, only much more enthusiastic than Angelis was in the CGI series. I really like the Brenner era's voice acting in the UK dub, but I don't really like the US voices. Thomas sounds like Sonic the Hedgehog, Percy sounds like a chain-smoking toddler, Edward doesn't sound as old as he is, and Emily not having a Scottish accent is just really weird to me. This episode is so good that I think it deserves a 10 out of 10. One of the best episodes of the best era. In conclusion, the Fat Controller had some decent episodes and some boring ones. I don't know what else to say. Go check out Yami Tea's channels, her reviews are much better than this one. Bye.